Oopsie. Hi there. Excuse me, I'm sorry to start like that. Hi there, it's Dr. Shiroko. I hope you're doing good today. It's Labor Day, and I'm here today to talk to you about irritable bowel syndrome. And, it's been something that I've dealt with for most of my own personal life and with many of my patients. And so it's a very important symptom and problem that people have in their lives every single day. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, first of all, the symptoms of irritable bowel, which I have not written in these notes here. But the symptoms include, gas and bloating and pain, and some people alternate between constipation and diarrhea. Some people just have constipation, and some people just have diarrhea all the time. And you may not know what to eat because there are different reactivities to different foods, and some days you may be behaving just perfectly and not feel like anything is working at all. I don't know if this sounds like you at all, but definitely I've had those times myself, and in different decades there are different symptoms or different diagnostic things that people talk about. So I'm going to go over some of that, and I'm going to first start with what could be the causes. And even if the cause may be one thing, whoops. Oh shoot, where's my document? Right here. Even if the cause may be one thing, the symptoms are kind of the same for each of the different possible causes, and there may be different elements at different times. And one of the most important things to remember about SIBO is that you may have the gut. The gut is the place where your emotions kind of live, so we always say that I have a gut feeling or I have a feeling. Our emotions are really, our gut responds very deeply to our emotions. And so when we're stressed or when we're upset, or if we have chemical imbalances in our nervous system, our gut will respond to that. And so one of the first things to note is, like, if you really have a hard time managing the symptoms, then pay attention to what your emotions are and your stressors, and work at getting that balance first. I always talk about this thing called the triangle of wellness, which is immune system, hormones, and nervous system. And our emotions are, trigger our nervous system to behave a certain way. They trigger our immune system, and they trigger our hormones. And so all kinds of emotions will affect this triangle of wellness, and these are the sort of the root of getting well when you're struggling with something. Is if you have immune system imbalance, hormone imbalance, or nervous system imbalance, then it will affect your gut on many different levels. And so often when I work with somebody who's having gut issues, I will talk to them about getting these things balanced first before we tackle whatever's going on in the gut, because that will help stabilize emotions. So it's like this three-way street or many-way street, where getting your system in balance, especially this triangle, because this is the foundation of getting better, whatever your health issue is. Anyway, the main causes of irritable bowel syndrome include reactions to certain foods. So what I found over the many years that I've been working with this is that people who have gut issues are super sensitive to grains. In particular, some people have celiac, or many people react to almost all grains. And so one of the first things to do is to cut out whatever foods you feel like you might react to. And I often call this an elimination diet, where you eliminate certain foods that are a problem. The other issue can be called leaky gut. Leaky gut is basically when your intestinal lining has literally holes in it. that allow you to absorb the foods that you eat. And those holes are tiny, tiny, and they're designed to absorb the components of the food that you eat, so that when you eat protein or fats or carbohydrates, that gets broken down into its individual components, which are like amino acids for proteins, or one fatty acid for fats, or the carbohydrate, the simple sugar that the carbohydrate is built from. And then that is supposed to absorb into your gut. And imagine that your gut lining is like a colander, and when the holes get broken, the little tiny holes, so when you pour pasta into a colander, then all the water drips out and the pasta is left in the container. And imagine that if you had leaky gut, that those holes in the container are broken, and so instead of just the water dripping through, you have the noodles dripping through. And our immune system doesn't know what noodles are. It knows what the simple sugars are and the fats that you put in with it. It knows those, but it doesn't know the noodle or the big fat molecule. And so when it sees those things that absorb into the bloodstream, it reacts to it. And then that causes all kinds of inflammation in your body. It causes pains and swelling and possibly migraines, joint pains, all kinds of symptoms. You might have nasal congestion all the time. So all kinds of symptoms when you have leaky gut, because you're absorbing things into your bloodstream that you should not be absorbing. The other possible cause of irritable bowel syndrome is hidden infections. And you can have infections of all sorts. You get parasites, you can have bacteria, you can have yeast or fungi, or you can have viruses. There are viruses that live in the gut and they can cause irritation. I had one client who for years would get sick every 6 weeks. And it seemed like it was cyclical, and we couldn't find anything. We did stool tests, and stool tests often don't look at viruses, so we wouldn't be able to find those. So at one point we figured out that this illness had something to do with a hidden virus, and we started to treat it that way, and it really made a difference. You could also have chemical reactions as a cause of your irritable bowel syndrome. So you could be eating things like, everybody talks about GMOs, and GMOs are really foods that are grown with Roundup in order to keep them from grains, especially, but many foods are grown with Roundup, and many plants are sprayed with Roundup to protect the plant from getting various creatures living on it. Another cause, and I talked about this at the very beginning, is emotional imbalances. So when you're stressed, when you're upset, when you have a fight with somebody, when you're not sure, what's going on in your life, all kinds of reasons. I remember I used to get irritable bowel symptoms, and I was eating perfectly. And so this might have happened to some of you as well, where I'd have these symptoms and I'd get bloated and I'd have this terrible abdominal pain just when I was at a medical conference or at different conferences. And it had to do with, being in an environment that I wasn't familiar with. I was being really good with my diets. I was eating vegetables and protein and taking good care of myself. And so the only reason that it could have happened was because I was stressed. And even subtle stresses, even when you're hanging out with people that you know and that maybe you've known over the years because you go to the same conferences all the time, you might still be stressed when you go into a new environment and meet with new people that you haven't met before or haven't spent time with before. So it can be that simple. And one sort of emerging cause of irritable bowel is people who have had head injuries or neck trauma, which can cause damage to the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is the main nerve of digestion, and it's the longest nerve in the body. It starts way up here in the head and goes down. It comes out of the head or out of the skull, kind of at the below the ear, and then it goes down along the inside of your neck, goes and regulates your heartbeat, regulates your breathing, goes down into your stomach, and then goes through your entire digestive system into your small intestine, which is very long, into your large intestine, and all the way down to your rectum, so that you have stimulation of the movement of your digestive tract with the vagus nerve. It's always called the rest and digest part of the nervous system. And injury to the vagus nerve, like if you had a head injury, that could damage the vagus nerve, or if you had a neck trauma, that could damage it, or like a whiplash injury where your head is bounced inside the skull. So there's all kinds of easy ways to damage the vagus nerve, because it's right here on the surface of your neck as it travels down into the rest of your body. So treatment for the vagus nerve can really make a difference in your digestive system. And of course, because it also communicates directly with the brain, so then there's all of the other brain chemistry issues that could also be supporting your nervous system if you're having a problem there. So the diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome is really often a diagnosis of exclusion. So when you see a regular doctor, you'll get lots of testing. You might have an MRI of your guts, you might have a CT scan, or you might have blood tests and colonoscopy or endoscopy looking for a cause. But often stool tests aren't a part of that for some reason. And excuse me. So another way, you just do all these kinds of tests, and then if you can't find anything else, then you might be called a person who has irritable bowel syndrome. And I remember when I was 16, I got diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. That was a long time ago. And the doctor tried to give me Valium. And so I guess even back then they knew that emotional stress could cause irritable bowel syndrome, but Valium was a sedative and an addictive sedative, so it wasn't really the right approach for that problem. But a lot of doctors will give antidepressants or sedatives in order to help calm the nervous system so that the guts will stop reacting. So stool tests are specific tests that look for bacteria, parasites, yeast, worms, all kinds of things. And quite often, when you have irritable bowel syndrome, you may find some imbalance of the gut microbiome. Now, since I started practicing this, the science on the gut microbiome has changed so much. So much information is available now on the gut microbiome, and there are so many ways to look at it and to test it. But really, what you want to do is find the right bacterial environment to help support your guts. So we'll talk about that in just a second when we talk about treatment. And then, the recent science is about what's called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And over 67% of people who have irritable bowel syndrome also have SIBO. And so small intestines are not supposed to have bacteria in them. They're supposed to help you digest your food and absorb your nutrients, but they're not supposed to have an overgrowth of bacteria. And so sometimes what happens is when our stomach doesn't work right, or our gallbladder doesn't work right, or our pancreas doesn't work right, which are the upstream things from the small intestine, you can get bacteria overgrowing in the small intestine, which will cause a lot of these symptoms. And there are breath tests that you can do to see if that's one of the things that you have. And then if you have that, then there's a whole route of treatment that would help with that. So treatment options for irritable bowel syndrome include various diets. One well-known diet is called the FODMap diet, which is a diet where you eliminate foods that are able to ferment in your guts. So you eliminate onions and garlic and the cruciferous vegetables that are, and the grains, all these foods that if your digestion's not working right, you would get gas from them, and they would ferment in your small intestine. And so by eliminating those foods, a lot of people have a major improvement. Some people improve just by eliminating the foods that they seem to react to, like gluten, dairy, sugar, those kinds of foods, and that really makes a difference for them. Also, if you've done a stool test and you find that there's a bacterial imbalance or some sort of infection of some sort, then what you'd want to do is do some kind of herbal treatment to help balance the microbiome. And there are, of course, different kinds of probiotics that you can use. One of the probiotics that I like that seems to be effective for irritable bowel is something called spore biotics. And again, the science on probiotics has become so sophisticated. I think that it's not going to be long before we'll be able to do tests. And in fact, there are some tests that are available for this. You can do a test and then you'll get a specific recommendation of the right probiotic for your gut environment. And those seem to be pretty effective. You can also take various supplements to support your nervous system. So 5-HTP is the precursor for serotonin. And and you can take it as a supplement. And we have more 5-HTP in our gut than we do in our brain, actually. And so that might be one of the ways in which we support your nervous system, and then that will calm your nervous system and help you resolve some of the symptoms of the irritable bowel. And then there are, of course, antibiotics. And again, I've mentioned other drugs. There are antidepressants that sometimes people get on, antibiotics to help get rid of various bacteria, antifungal medications that will help get rid of certain yeast, because yeast is another possible infection in your gut. So there are many, many tools in the treatment for this condition. And and of course, because I do acupuncture, I'm going to talk about acupuncture. Now, acupuncture is an amazing tool for irritable bowel because it works on the energy level, it works on the physical level, and it works emotionally. And it can be used to help activate the vagus nerve, calm the nervous system. It can do so many different things, and especially certain Japanese style of doing acupuncture that I do, where I feel the belly to see what's going on, and then that will allow me to put the needles in just the right place. And then a recent addition to my repertoire in what I do in my office is using a laser, a cold laser. There's a specific laser settings that can help, again, reduce inflammation in your belly, reduce inflammation in your guts, and it has been shown to be very effective in helping people deal with symptoms of irritable bowel and or swelling and irritation of their guts. And then I want to just go over a little list of things that you could do for yourself that include managing your stress. I wanted to stop this. So stress management is a great way to calm your whole nervous system. And so there's so many things that you can do. You could do yoga, you could do meditation, you could do calming spiritual practices, you can do all kinds of things first thing in the morning to help manage the stress and to improve your gut function. If you're traveling and you tend to get anxious when you're traveling, then you could do something every morning when you get up wherever you are in the travel and just breathe and calm yourself. And there's a whole bunch of ways to do that. And one of the things that I really like, this is a simple thing that you could do to just calm your nervous system, is to give yourself a hug like this. Put your arms on both shoulders. These points up here are actually connected to the large intestine and the small intestine. So your fingers would be touching some key points on your large intestine and small intestine. And you just close your eyes and you take some deep breaths and you breathe in for a count of 5. Hold it for a count of 3. Let it out for a count of 5. Hold it for a count of 3 at the bottom. And then just do that for 2 or 3 minutes. It will calm your whole nervous system. which will so help your guts. Another thing that I didn't write here, but I think is really helpful, is never eat when you're upset, or try not to eat when you're upset. And if you are upset when you eat, then do this same calming action before you sit down to eat. And you know how people are always talking about saying your prayers before you eat, or having a moment of gratitude before you eat your food. And I think that's such a great way to go, where you just have a moment of gratitude and kind of stop yourself before you dig into the food that you're going to eat. And just have a calming breath and recognize the gift of what you're about to take into your body, and just kind of approach it from that angle of peaceful, calm nourishment. Because nourishment is such an important element of what happens when we eat, but it's also such an important element of our lives, to feel nourished in our lives and to take in love. So I want to end with that, to talk about taking in love when you eat, making your food with love, like to bring love into your whole entire digestive environment, because our guts are so sensitive to the vagus nerve, to our nervous system, it can make such a huge difference. In Chinese medicine, we talk about the stomach as being the pot where you cook food, so you take your food in and you transform it into energy before it gets spread out to the rest of your body. That's the way Chinese medicine expresses the digestive process. And so when you take in food with love, and you there's a lot of people who talk about mindful eating. That's a really helpful thing to do when you have gut issues, is to eat slowly, to chew your food really well. That's another thing. Your mouth is the place where the digestive process starts. So if you're chewing your food really well and sort of being mindful as you eat, it will make such a huge difference in how you feel when you digest your food. Okay, well, so I hope you found that helpful, and I look forward to hearing from you. And if you need any individual help, please contact my office. hearttoheartmedicalcenter.com is the place to reach me. And have a wonderful, wonderful day. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.